The autumn rain fell steadily on the weathered roof of the Lazy J Ranch as Frank Jameson sat by his fireplace, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the flames dance in the hearth. At 52, Frank had lived alone on his sprawling Texas ranch for nearly a decade, ever since his wife Margaret had passed from consumption and their only son had died in a riding accident the following spring. The silence of the empty house had become his constant companion, broken only by the occasional visit from neighbors or ranch hands checking on cattle. The knock at his door came so softly that at first Frank thought it might be a tree branch, blown against the wood by the wind. But when it repeated, more insistent this time, he set down his coffee and made his way to the heavy oak door. What he found on his covered porch made his heart clench with unexpected emotion. A boy, no more. The 9-year-old stood shivering in the rain-soaked darkness. His clothes were too thin for the October chill, his hair plastered to his head by the downpour, and in his small arms he clutched what appeared to be a worn carpet-bag and a wooden cross. But it was the boy's eyes that struck Frank most powerfully. They held a grief so profound it seemed to age the child beyond his years, yet beneath that sorrow flickered a desperate hope that made Frank's throat tighten with recognition. "Please, sir," the boy said, his voice barely audible above the sound of rain drumming on the porch roof. "My pa died today. Can I stay with you tonight?" Frank's weathered face softened as he looked down at this small figure who had appeared like a lost soul seeking sanctuary. Without hesitation, he stepped aside and gestured for the boy to come in from the cold. "Of course, son. Get yourself in here by the fire before you catch your death." Frank closed the door firmly against the storm and turned to study his unexpected visitor more closely. "What's your name, boy?" "Daniel, sir. Daniel Murphy." The child's teeth were chattering as he spoke, and he clutched his meager possessions tighter to his chest. "My pa was Patrick Murphy. He worked the Henderson place about 10 miles east of here." Frank knew the Henderson spread, a hard scrabble farm that barely managed to produce enough to keep its workers fed. He also knew that life there was hard, especially for families trying to make ends meet on tenant wages. "Well, Daniel Murphy, first things first. Let's get you out of those wet clothes and into something warm." Frank disappeared into his bedroom and returned with one of his old flannel shirts, which would serve as a nightshirt for the boy. "You change into this while I heat up some stew. I bet you haven't eaten much today." As Daniel changed near the warmth of the fireplace, Frank busied himself in the kitchen, heating leftover beef stew and cutting thick slices of fresh bread. But his mind was racing with questions and concerns. What had happened to the boy's father? Did Daniel have any other family? And most importantly, what was he going to do with a grieving child who had nowhere else to go? When Daniel emerged in the oversized flannel shirt that hung nearly to his ankles, Frank was struck by how small and vulnerable the boy looked. Yet there was something in his bearing that spoke of inner strength, a quality Frank recognized from his own difficult childhood on a failing farm in Arkansas. "Sit yourself down at the table, Daniel. This stew will warm you right up." Frank set a steaming bowl in front of the boy, along with a glass of fresh milk. "Now, if you're up to it, why don't you tell me what happened to your pa?" Daniel ate slowly, at first as if he hadn't seen a proper meal in days, but gradually he began to relax in the warmth and comfort of the ranch house. Between bites, he shared his story in a voice that remained steady despite the magnitude of his loss. "Pa's been sick for weeks with a cough that just kept getting worse. Mrs. Henderson tried to help with her remedies, but nothing worked. This morning, he could barely get out of bed, but he still tried to work because he said we needed the money." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "I found him collapsed in the barn around noon. He was burning up with fever and could hardly breathe." Frank felt his jaw tighten with anger at the thought of a sick man being forced to work simply to keep food on the table. "What happened then, son?" I ran to get Mrs. Henderson, and she sent for the doctor from town. But by the time he arrived, Daniel set down his spoon and looked directly at Frank with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 9-year-old. Pa died holding my hand. His last words were that I should find good people who would take care of me, and that he was sorry. He couldn't provide better for me. The simple honesty of the boy's account hit Frank like a physical blow. He remembered his own father's death, the helpless feeling of watching a strong man waste away from illness and poverty, the terror of being left alone in an uncertain world. "Do you have any other family, Daniel? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" The boy shook his head. "It was just me and Pa. Ma died when I was little, and Pa said all our kin were back in Ireland. He came to America to make a better life, but..." Daniel's voice trailed off as the reality of his situation seemed to fully hit him for the first time. Frank studied the boy's face, seeing not just grief, but also a quiet dignity that impressed him deeply. This child had endured tremendous loss, yet he had somehow found the courage to seek help rather than simply give up. "Daniel, what made you come to my ranch? It's a fair distance from the Henderson place, especially on a night like this. Pa used to talk about you sometimes. He said Frank Jameson was a fair man who treated his workers decent and always paid what he promised. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should try to find you because you were the kind of man who understood what it meant to struggle." The words hit Frank with unexpected force. He had never realized that his reputation had spread beyond his immediate circle, or that his simple efforts to treat people fairly had made such an impression on a struggling tenant farmer. "Your pa was a good judge of character, son." Frank reached across the table and placed his hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. "And he raised a brave boy who knew how to ask for help when he needed it. That takes real courage." Daniel looked up at Frank with hope, beginning to replace some of the despair in his eyes. "Does that mean I can stay tonight?" "I promise I won't be any trouble. I can sleep anywhere, even on the floor." Frank felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since losing his own son. Looking at this orphaned boy, he saw not just a child in need, but an opportunity for both of them to find something they had lost. "Daniel, you're not sleeping on any floor in my house. I've got a spare bedroom that's been empty too long, and it's yours for as long as you need it." Frank paused, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "In fact, if you're willing, I'd like you to stay permanently. This ranch is too big for one man, and I could use someone to help me remember what it's like to have family around." The transformation in Daniel's face was immediate and profound. The crushing weight of grief and uncertainty seemed to lift slightly, replaced by wonder and cautious joy. "You mean it? You'd let me stay here forever, even though I'm not really your kin?" Frank smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile he'd managed in years. "Son, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about people who find each other when they need each other most. Your pa was right to send you here, and I think maybe it wasn't just luck that brought you to my door tonight." Daniel stood up from his chair and, without warning, threw his arms around Frank's waist in a fierce hug. The rancher felt tears he hadn't shed in years threaten to spill over as he returned the embrace. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Thank you for letting me stay. I promise I'll work hard and learn everything you can teach me." "I know you will, Daniel. And the first thing I'm going to teach you is that you don't have to earn your place here. You belong here now just because I say so and because your heart is in the right place." As Frank tucked Daniel into the spare bedroom that night, the boy looked around at the simple but comfortable furnishings with obvious appreciation. "Mr. Jameson, do you think Pa would be proud of me for finding you?" "I think your pa is looking down at you right now with more pride than you can imagine, Daniel. He raised a son who knew how to be brave when it mattered most, and that's the greatest gift any father can give." That night, as the storm gradually passed and stars began to appear through the breaking clouds, Both the man and the boy slept more peacefully than either had in months. Frank had found purpose again in the simple act of caring for someone who needed him, while Daniel had discovered that even in the darkest moments of loss, new families could form and hope could be reborn. Outside, the Lazy J Ranch settled into quiet contentment, as if the land itself approved of the new arrangement. And somewhere in the vast Texas sky, it seemed as though Patrick Murphy's spirit finally found peace, knowing his beloved son had found safety and love in the home of a good man who understood the true meaning of family. 3 months had passed since that rain-soaked October night when Daniel Murphy had appeared at Frank Jameson's door, and the transformation at the Lazy J Ranch was remarkable. What had once been a quiet, lonely homestead filled only with the echoes of past happiness had become alive again with the sounds of daily life, laughter, and the easy conversation between a man and boy who had become genuine family. Daniel had proven himself to be everything Frank could have hoped for in a son and more. The boy possessed an insatiable curiosity about ranch life, a natural aptitude for working with animals, and most importantly, a cheerful disposition that had gradually coaxed Frank out of the shell of solitude he'd built around himself after losing his wife and biological son. "Mr. Frank," Daniel called from the corral where he was brushing down Buttercup, a gentle Palomino mare that Frank had designated as the boy's special responsibility. "I think Buttercup's favoring her left front hoof a little. Should I check for stones?" Frank smiled as he approached the corral, continually impressed by Daniel's growing expertise and attention to detail. In 3 months, the boy had learned more about horses and cattle than many ranch hands picked up in years. "Good eye, son." "Yes. Let's take a look." Frank demonstrated the proper way to lift and examine a horse's hoof, then watched with pride as Daniel successfully removed a small pebble that had been lodged between the shoe and the hoof wall. "You're becoming quite the horseman, Daniel." The boy beamed at the praise, but Frank noticed he still sometimes looked surprised when complimented, as if he wasn't quite used to being valued for his contributions. It was a reminder of the poverty and uncertainty Daniel had known before arriving at the ranch, and it made Frank even more determined to build the boy's confidence and sense of belonging. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Frank?" Daniel said, as they walked toward the house for their midday meal. "You can ask me anything, son. You know that." Daniel was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts in the careful way Frank had come to recognize. "Do you ever miss being alone? I mean, before I came, you had the whole ranch to yourself, no one asking questions or needing things. Sometimes I worry that I'm too much trouble." Frank stopped walking and knelt down to meet Daniel's eyes directly. This conversation had been coming for weeks, and Frank had been preparing for it because he understood the boy's need for reassurance. "Daniel, do you remember what this place felt like that first night you arrived?" The boy nodded. "It felt safe and warm and like home, I guess." "Well, that's exactly how it felt to me, too, for the first time in years. You didn't take anything away from me by coming here, son. You gave me back something I'd lost and didn't even realize how much I'd missed." Frank placed his hands on Daniel's shoulders. "Before you arrived, I was just existing, going through the motions of living. Now I have a reason to get up each morning, someone to share meals with, someone to teach and learn from. You saved me as much as I saved you." The relief that washed over Daniel's face was immediate and profound. "Really? You're not just saying that to make me feel better? Have I ever lied to you about anything important? No, sir. Then you can trust me when I tell you that having you here is the best thing that's happened to me in a decade." Frank stood up and ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Now, how about we get some food in us and then work on that reading lesson? I want to see how you're doing with that new book." Daniel's face lit up with genuine excitement. Frank had been teaching him to read using everything from dime novels to farming journals, and the boy had shown remarkable progress. What had started as basic literacy lessons had evolved into discussions about everything from geography to philosophy. As Daniel's quick mind absorbed new concepts with impressive speed, after lunch they settled into their routine of spending an hour with books and writing exercises. Frank had discovered that Daniel learned best when lessons connected to practical applications, so they often read about places they might visit, techniques they could use on the ranch, or stories that offered moral lessons relevant to their daily lives. "Mr. Frank," Daniel said as he carefully worked through a passage about cattle drives, "this book talks about driving herds all the way to Kansas. Have you ever done anything like that?" "I have indeed. When I was not much older than you are now, I went on my first cattle drive with my uncle. It was hard work, but it taught me everything I needed to know about being responsible for something bigger than myself." Daniel's eyes widened with interest. "Do you think someday I could go on a cattle drive? I mean, when I'm older and know enough to be helpful?" Frank felt his heart swell with pride and affection. "Son, someday this ranch is going to be yours. And when that time comes, you'll need to know everything there is to know about running cattle, including how to get them to market. So yes, when you're ready, we'll plan a drive together." The casual way Frank had mentioned the ranch belonging to Daniel someday made the boy go very still. "You mean that? The Lazy J would really be mine?" "Daniel, you're my son in every way that matters. Of course, the ranch will be yours someday, but more importantly, I want you to earn it by learning everything you need to know to run it properly. That's going to take years of hard work and study." "I want to learn everything," Daniel said with fierce determination. "I want to be worthy of what you're giving me." Frank smiled at the boy's intensity. "You're already worthy, son, but I'm glad you want to learn because there's a lot to know about ranching, and some of it can only be learned through experience." That afternoon, Frank began Daniel's education in the business side of ranching, teaching him about breeding records, market prices, and the importance of maintaining good relationships with buyers and suppliers. The boy absorbed every detail. With the focused attention of someone who understood he was being prepared for significant responsibility. As evening approached, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. It had become their favorite time of day, a quiet period for reflection and casual conversation that deepened their bond with each passing week. "Mr. Frank," Daniel said softly, "I've been thinking about Pa a lot lately. Not sad thoughts, but good memories. Is that normal?" "It's more than normal, Daniel. It's healthy and important. Your Pa was a good man who loved you deeply, and keeping his memory alive honors both of you." Frank leaned back in his rocking chair. "What kind of memories have you been thinking about?" "Mostly about how he used to tell me stories after dinner, even when he was tired from working all day, and how he always made sure I had enough to eat, even if it meant he went without. He taught me that taking care of people you love is more important than taking care of yourself." Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Pa sounds like he was a wise man, and it sounds like he did an excellent job raising his son to understand what really matters in life. Do you think he would approve of me being here? Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to make it on my own, the way he did when he came to America. Daniel, your Pa's dying wish was for you to find good people who would take care of you. He knew that a 9-year-old boy shouldn't have to face the world alone, and he trusted you to make smart decisions about who to trust." Frank reached over and squeezed the boy's shoulder. "I think he's looking down at us right now, grateful that his son found safety and love, and proud that you've grown into such a fine young man." That night, as Frank tucked Daniel into bed, the boy surprised him with a question that revealed how much he'd been thinking about their relationship. "Mr. Frank, would it be all right if I started calling you something other than Mr. Frank? It feels too formal for family." Frank felt his eyes mist over at the tentative hope in Daniel's voice. "What would you like to call me, son?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Would it be okay if I called you Pa? I mean, I know you're not my real Pa, but you're taking care of me like one, and I—" His voice trailed off, as if he were afraid he'd overstepped some invisible boundary. Frank had to clear his throat twice before he could answer. "Daniel, there would be no greater honor in my life than having you call me Pa. Your biological father will always be your first Pa, and that's as it should be. But if you want me to be your second Pa, the one who gets to watch you grow up and become the man you're meant to be, then that's exactly what I want to be." Daniel's smile could have lit up the entire ranch. "Good night, Pa. Good night, son. Sweet dreams." As Frank closed Daniel's bedroom door and made his way to his own room, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. 3 months ago, he had been a lonely widower going through the motions of living. Tonight, he was a father again, with purpose and joy, and someone to love who loved him in return. Outside his window, the stars shone down on the Lazy J Ranch with what seemed like approval. And somewhere in that vast Texas sky, Frank was certain that both Margaret and Patrick Murphy were smiling down at the family that had formed from loss and hope, binding two hearts together with the strongest force in the universe: love, freely given and gratefully received. 2 years had transformed Daniel Murphy from a grieving orphan into a confident young man who carried himself with the easy assurance of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. At 11 years old, he could ride as well as men twice his age, handle cattle with natural skill, and most importantly, he had grown into his role as Frank Jameson's son with a grace that impressed everyone who knew them. The Lazy J Ranch had prospered under their partnership, not just because of Frank's experience and Daniel's eager assistance, but because their genuine care for each other had created an atmosphere of contentment that seemed to extend to everything around them. The cattle were healthier, the land more productive, and neighbors often remarked on how the ranch seemed to radiate the kind of peace that comes from a truly happy home. On this particular morning in late spring, Frank and Daniel were preparing for the arrival of a visitor who would test everything they had built together. Judge William Harrison from Austin had written to inform them that he was conducting a review of unofficial adoptions in the county, and he would be visiting the ranch to assess Daniel's situation. "Pa, are you worried?" Daniel asked as they stood on the front porch, watching for the judge's carriage to appear on the distant road. Frank considered the question carefully. Over the past 2 years, he had grown to appreciate Daniel's directness and had made it a point to always answer the boy's questions honestly. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned, son, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm not worried about whether you belong here. That's settled as far as I'm concerned. I'm worried about some bureaucrat who doesn't know us trying to make decisions about our family based on paperwork and regulations." Daniel moved closer to Frank, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Whatever happens, Pa, I want you to know that these have been the best 2 years of my life. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after 2 years of being called Pa, the word still filled him with profound joy and responsibility. "And you saved me right back, Daniel. Don't ever forget that." The judge's carriage appeared on the horizon shortly before noon, a formal, black vehicle that seemed out of place against the rustic beauty of the ranch landscape. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s, stern-faced and precise in his movements, who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected people's lives. "Mr. Jameson," the judge said formally as Frank and Daniel met him at the gate. "I am Judge Harrison. I trust you received my correspondence about the purpose of my visit." "I did, Your Honor. This is my son, Daniel." Frank placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're prepared to answer any questions you might have about our family." Judge Harrison studied Daniel with the careful attention of someone evaluating evidence. "Son, I need you to understand that I'm here to make sure you're being properly cared for and that your best interests are being served. You can speak freely about your situation here." Daniel met the judge's gaze with steady confidence that impressed even Frank. "Yes, sir, I understand, and I can tell you that I've never been happier or felt more loved than I have living here with my pa." "Your pa?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Jameson is not your biological father, correct?" "No, sir. My biological father was Patrick Murphy, and he died 2 years ago. But Frank Jameson is my pa in every way that matters. He's taught me everything I need to know about being a good man. He's given me a home and a future, and most importantly, he's loved me like I was his own blood from the very first night." Frank felt a surge of pride at Daniel's articulate response, but he also noticed the judge's expression remained skeptical. "I see. And Mr. Jameson, what are your long-term intentions regarding this boy? Are you prepared to provide for his education, his future, and all the responsibilities that come with raising a child?" "Judge Harrison, Daniel isn't just a responsibility to me. He's my greatest joy and my heir. He's been learning not just basic education, but everything he needs to know to run this ranch someday. More than that, he's become the son I thought I'd lost forever when my biological boy died 3 years ago." The judge made notes in a leather-bound journal, his expression giving nothing away. "I'd like to tour your property and see how the boy lives. I also need to speak with him privately to ensure he's not being coerced or mistreated in any way." For the next hour, Frank showed Judge Harrison every corner of the ranch. The judge examined Daniel's bedroom, which Frank had gradually furnished with books, toys, and personal items that reflected a child who was truly cherished. He inspected the boy's clothes, all well-made and properly fitted. He observed the easy interaction between Frank and Daniel as they went about their daily routines. But it was when the judge spoke with Daniel alone that the real test came. "Son," Judge Harrison said as they sat on the front porch while Frank tended to horses in the nearby corral, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Mr. Jameson ever mistreated you in any way? Has he ever made you work too hard, or punished you unfairly, or made you feel unwelcome?" Daniel looked directly at the judge with the same steady confidence he had shown earlier. "Judge Harrison, can I ask you something first?" "I suppose so." "Do you have children of your own?" The judge's stern expression softened slightly. "I do, 2 sons and a daughter." "Then you know what it feels like when your child looks at you with complete trust and love, right? And you know how it feels to want to protect them and teach them and make sure they have everything they need to succeed in life?" "Yes, I do know those feelings." Daniel smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Then you'll understand when I tell you that's exactly how my pa looks at me every single day. He's never raised a hand to me in anger, never made me feel like a burden, and never treated me like anything other than his beloved son. He's taught me to read and write, to handle animals, to manage money, and most importantly, to treat all people with respect and kindness." The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying Daniel's earnest face. "And you're happy here? Truly happy?" "Sir, 2 years ago I was a scared, grieving boy with nowhere to go and no one to care about me. Today, I'm a young man with a father who loves me, a home that will always be mine, and skills that will serve me for the rest of my life. More than that, I've learned what it means to be part of a real family." Daniel paused, then added with simple sincerity, "I can't imagine being happier anywhere else in the world." When Judge Harrison called Frank back to join them, his demeanor had changed noticeably. The stern officiousness had been replaced by something warmer and more human. Mr. Jameson, I've conducted dozens of these interviews over the years, and I can honestly say I've rarely seen a child who is so clearly thriving in his environment. Daniel is articulate, confident, well-educated, and most importantly, genuinely happy. Frank felt relief wash over him, but he remained cautious. Does that mean you'll approve our arrangement? More than that, Mr. Jameson. I'm prepared to expedite legal adoption papers if you're interested. What you've created here isn't just a guardianship or an informal arrangement. This is a real family, built on love and mutual respect. Daniel deserves the security of knowing that relationship is legally protected. Frank looked at Daniel, who was practically glowing with joy at the judge's words. Son, would you like that? Would you like to be a Jameson officially and legally? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. More than anything, Pa, I'd be honored to carry your name. 3 months later, on a beautiful August morning, Judge Harrison returned to the Lazy J Ranch to finalize the adoption. The ceremony was simple but profound, conducted on the front porch of the ranch house with several neighbors present as witnesses. Daniel Murphy, Judge Harrison said formally, do you freely choose to become the legal son of Frank Jameson, with all the rights and responsibilities that relationship entails? I do, Your Honor, with all my heart. And Frank Jameson, do you freely choose to accept Daniel as your legal son, promising to love, protect, and provide for him as long as you live? I do, Your Honor. It would be my greatest privilege. Then, by the authority vested in me by the state of Texas, I hereby declare that Daniel Murphy is now legally Daniel Jameson, with all the rights of a biological child. Congratulations to you both. As neighbors applauded and offered congratulations, Frank and Daniel embraced with the joy of people who had waited their entire lives for this moment of complete belonging. That evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset over their land, Daniel turned to Frank with a question that had been on his mind all day. Pa, do you think my biological father would be proud of who I've become? Frank smiled, remembering the boy who had appeared at his door on that rainy October night 2 years ago. Daniel, your first father raised you to be brave, kind, and smart, enough to find help when you needed it. Those qualities led you to my door and helped you become the remarkable young man you are today. I know Patrick Murphy is looking down at us with nothing but pride and gratitude. Daniel leaned against Frank's shoulder with the comfortable familiarity of a child who had never doubted his place in his father's heart. I love you, Pa. I love you too, son, forever and always. As the stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, father and son sat in peaceful contentment, surrounded by the land that would someday be Daniel's inheritance and the love that had transformed them both. What had begun with a desperate plea on a stormy night had become a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The Lazy J Ranch had indeed found its future in the person of Daniel Jameson, a boy who had lost everything and found something. Even better, a father who had promised forever and meant every word of it. And in the quiet evening air, it seemed as though all the spirits who had brought them together, both human and divine, were smiling down on a family that proved love could triumph over any loss, heal any wound, and create miracles from the simplest acts of human kindness. Thank you for joining Frank and Daniel on their incredible journey from strangers to father and son. This story reminds us that family is created not just through birth, but through the deliberate choice to love and care for one another. If this tale of adoption, belonging, and unconditional love touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that celebrate the power of human connection and the true meaning of home. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to find family, and that sometimes the most profound love comes when we least expect it. Don't forget to subscribe and keep these heartwarming stories alive.